Korach, God's trumpet call presence. Fifth reading from the book of Numbers. 38th reading from Torah. Outline of Torah portion. Rebellion of Korach, Dathan, Abiram and On. Numbers chapter 16 verse 1 to verse 13. Korach and his followers accuse Moshe and Aharon. Verse 1 to 3. The Torah portion begins with the rebellion of Korach, a cousin of Moshe and Aharon. Moshe and Aharon and Korach descended from the Kohath, son of Levi. Moshe and Aharon from the family of Abiram, and Korah from the family of Isaac. Korach managed to gather to himself Dathan, Abiram and On from the tribe of Reuben, among with 250 others. The rebellion may have sparked by the decree to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. It may have happened at an earlier time when tabernacle was erected. He may have been upset for not chosen for a more exalted position within the tribe of Levi. Korah accused Moshe and Aharon of pride and self-seeking. He said, "You take too much upon yourselves." It seems that Korah was looking for equal standing with Moshe. He wanted to share the power, authority, and position God has given to Moshe. Accusation was made in front of 250 leaders of the congregation, men of renown. Korah proclaimed the holiness of the people. He said, "All the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them." Response of Moshe to Korah and his followers, verse 4 to 11. At the rebellion of Korah and his followers, Moshe fell on his face once again. After he prayed, he had a sense of direction for the situation. Moshe directed Korah and his followers to take their censers, put fire in them, and put incense in them before the Lord in the morning. Moshe tried to delay the confrontation by saying that Adonai would make known his choice the next morning, and Adonai will show who are his and who is the person he will allow to approach him, come near him. Moshe was referring to the service of the incense. Nadab and Abihu burned at this service by offering unauthorized fire before the Lord. Moshe also reminded Korah the honorable service God has entrusted on them. Moshe tried to appeal to Dathan and Abiram, but they refused to speak to him. Moshe restates his challenge. Numbers chapter 16 verse 14 to verse 19. Dathan and Abiram speaks on behalf of the rebels, verse 12 to 14. Moshe sent to summon Dathan and Abiram, but they said, "We will not come up." They would not meet with Moshe and accused him of wanting to kill the children of Israel in the wilderness, referring to Egypt. They accused Moshe of bringing them out of a land flowing with milk and honey. Their lies made Moshe look as bad as possible. They accused Moshe of acting as a prince over them. 40 years ago, Moshe was a prince. He was a confident man and thought he could deliver his people Israel. But God broke that self-confidence and trained him into a humble servant in the wilderness prior to sending him before Pharaoh. After the words of Dathan and Abiram, Moshe was angry, and he prayed to the Lord not to accept their offerings, and that he had not taken one donkey from them or have hurt any one of them. Moshe had authority and power. He could have had the rebellious arrested and executed. Instead, Moshe trusted God to resolve this rebellion. So Moshe restated his challenge and told Korah that he and his company to be present before the Lord, and each one of them must take his censer and put incense in it and each one of them must bring his censer before the Lord. Since the rebels questioned Moshe and Aaron's leadership and priesthood, each group would come as worshipping priests, and the Lord would show which group he accepted. Korah assembled entire group who were against them at the entrance to the tent of meeting. It was 2 men against more than 250 in the presence of all the congregation. Then the glory of the Lord, presence of the Shekinah, appeared to all the congregation. God affirms Moshe's leadership over the nation of Israel, Numbers chapter 16 verse 20 to chapter 7 verse 8. God announces judgment on the rebels, verse 20. God spoke to Moshe and Aharon and said to separate themselves from among this congregation, that he may consume them in a moment. Moshe and Aharon interceded for Korach and his company, verse 22. Moshe and Aharon fell on their faces once again, and they pleaded with him that it was not right to destroy everyone for the sin of one man. Warning of judgment to come upon Korach and his companions, verse 23 to 27. God spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the congregation, saying, get away from the tents of Korach, Dathan, and Abiram. So Moshe went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he said to depart now from the tents of these wicked men. Touch nothing of theirs, lest you be consumed in all their sins. So people got away from their tents. Giving the warning was God's mercy, so that others will not get caught up in the judgment soon to come against the rebellious. The elders that were appointed in Numbers chapter 10 verse 14 to 27 meant to help Moshe at his work. Here they did exactly what God appointed them to do. God's judgment on Korah and his companions, verse 28 to 35. Moshe was given supernatural insight as to the judgment that would come upon those who rebelled, that they will not die in a natural death. It will be a new thing. The earth would swallow them up as evidence that these men have rejected the Lord. The fire came from the Lord and consumed the 250 men. Korach and his company was swallowed up by the earth. 250 men were destroyed by fire. Their worship was not accepted by God. Bronze covering, Numbers chapter 17 verse 1 to 8. God told Moshe to collect the 250 censers that was made of copper. They were collected, beaten flat, and used to cover the main altar of sacrifice. The censers of the rebels were holy and presented and preserved. Because even they worshipped wrongly, they worshipped the true God. And it was also to be a memorial to Israel that no outsider who is not a descendant of Israel should come to offer incense before the Lord, that they too might not become like Korah and his companions. The following day, the entire congregation of Israel complained against Moshe and Aharon, saying, you have killed the people of the Lord. While the congregation was assembled against Moshe and Aharon, they turned to the tent of meeting. The cloud had covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. Moshe and Aaron came to the front of the tent of meeting. Plague among the people, Numbers chapter 17 verse 9 to verse 15. The Lord's anger against the people. The Lord commanded Moshe to stand aside from the congregation, that he shall consume them in an instant. Moshe and Aaron fell on their faces. Moshe realized that God had started a plague among the people. Moshe said to Aaron, take the censer and put fire from the altar top into it and put incense. He instructed Aaron to quickly take it to the congregation and atone for them, for wrath has gone forth from the Lord, and the plague had begun. Moshe told Aaron to offer incense to the plague. He specifically told him to take the fire from the altar. Aaron stood between those who were alive and those who had already died in the plague. The high priest Aaron ran into the midst of the danger to rescue those who made accusations against him and Moshe, to stand between dead and the living. Seeking God's mercy to preserve lives indicate how serious the matter of prayer is. The plague stopped spreading after Aaron prayed. The number of the dead in the plague was 14,700, beside those who died because of the matter of Korah. Aaron returned to Moshe at the door of the tabernacle of meeting after the plague had stopped. Sign that God has chosen Moshe and Aharon. Numbers chapter 17, verse 16 to 24. Gathering of rods identified with each tribe. The Lord spoke to Moshe and said, "Speak to the children of Israel and get from them a rod from each father's house, 12 rods. A rod was a symbol of authority, and shepherds used a rod to guide and correct the sheep. Moshe was also instructed to write each man's name on his rod, and Aaron's name on the rod of Levi. Moshe was instructed to place the rods in the tent of meeting before the ark of testimony, where God met with Moshe. And God said, the rod of the man whom he will choose will blossom. And in this way, God will put a stop to the complaints of the people of Israel keep making against Moshe." So Moshe spoke to the children of Israel, and each of their leaders gave him a rod according to their father's house, 12 rods. Aaron's rod was amidst their rods. Moshe placed the rods in the tent of testimony. The following day, Moshe came to the tent of the testimony and found Aaron's staff, for the house of Levi had blossomed. It gave forth blossoms, sprouted buds, and produced ripe almonds. Almonds is the fruit that blossoms quicker than other fruits. Moshe took out all the rods from before the Lord to the children of Israel. They saw, and they took each man his rod. Responsibilities of priests and Levites. Aaron's staff put back in front of the testimony. Verse 25 to 28. The Lord commanded Moshe to put Aaron's rod back in front of the testimony. It was placed there as a sign for the rebellious, so that they will stop grumbling against God and will not die. But the people said to Moshe, "We are dying, we will perish, we are all lost." Laws pertaining to priests and Levites. Verse 18 to 20. The Lord said to Aaron that he and his sons and their descendants shall bear the iniquity related to the sanctuary and the priesthood. They were made accountable to God. They were responsible for the sanctity of the tabernacle and later the temple. They ensured that only authorized people participated in the temple service. Aaron himself, a Levite, only he and his descendants were given the priesthood. The whole tribe of Levi were called to help Aaron and his priests. Levites helped the priests, the congregation of Israel, and God. These areas were within their legitimate calling. They were not to approach the articles of the sanctuary and the altar lest they die. Though they had the gift to help from the Levites, Aaron and his sons must attend to the priesthood for everything at the altar and behind the veil. Aaron and his descendants received the priesthood from God as a gift for service. They did not do anything to merit the provision. It was a gift from God. The priests and the Levites will not receive a portion in the land of Israel. They are to be supported by various gifts and portions of the offerings. At the end of each harvest, children of Israel presented to the priest a portion known as terumah. It is the best of the oil, best of wine and grain. Terumah may only be eaten by priests and their family members. Both the terumah and the person who eats it must be ritually pure. To the priest belong the firstborn of the people and animals. The firstborn of people and non-kosher animals must be redeemed. The redemption price is kept by the priest. The firstborn of cows, goats, and sheep are not to be redeemed. They are to be brought on the altar, similar to a regular peace offering given to the Levites. Numbers chapter 18, verse 21 to 32. The descendants of Levi received a tithe from the harvest. The Lord said in verse 21, I have given all tithes of Israel as an inheritance in exchange for their service, which they perform in the service of the tent of meeting. This tithe is also known as Masa Rishon, first tithe, first tenth, or sometimes called Masa. When a Levite receives a Masa, he is required to separate a tenth from it. He then gives this tenth of a tenth to a priest. Masa Rishon can be eaten by anyone. Masha and the person who eats it need not be ritually pure.